Good morning Year 10 and welcome to this video series. It's a post-reading series where we're going to look at some of the more complicated and complex parts of the novel we've been studying together, Jekyll and Hyde. The first one's going to be themes, so this one's going to be quite long compared to some of the others, so we're going to have a look quickly about a few of them, the different things that I'm going to go through with you over the next few lessons. So what will we cover? We're going to do this mini series and it's going to take about 5 lessons. So whereas in reality, if we were in class, we would probably take about 3 weeks on this and doing lots of different tasks. But we're going to try and cram it in and get it done quickly, just kind of consolidating what we've already learnt in our studies. So it's going to take about 5 lessons to do. Some of it will overlap. You'll see that some of the motifs sort of overlap with themes and symbolism, but that's how the novel is designed to work. None of these things are explicitly referred to. Stevenson has created a successful novel because there are lots of clever details and they're all kind of hidden in this clever kind of exciting narrative. That's the beauty of it all. At the end of each lesson, I'm going to ask you to comment. I'm going to ask you to see what did you learn, what did you enjoy, what questions, if you've got any, do you have. You're also going to be asked to make notes on these topics in your books as well. You'll probably need about 2 pages per section, I'd have thought. So let's have a look what we're going to get into firstly. We're going to have a look today at themes. So science and religion is going to be our first focus. And secondly, secrecy and reputation. Okay, so these are the overarching ideas or concepts that are not explicitly referred to in the book but are in the book. So there's this conflict between science and religion, this idea that if you've got a decent reputation, you want to try and uphold that reputation, so you're going to keep lots of secrets. These are the sort of things that go together. Now these aren't the only themes in this novel. We've looked quite a lot of detail at the theme of duplicity or duality in Jekyll and Hyde as well. So that was one of the things that I decided just to miss out because we've done quite a lot of work on that already. So we're going to focus on these 4 ideas today. In the coming weeks, we're going to have a look at structure and narrative, so how the story is actually told, how the events unfold. Setting and symbolism, again, some of that we've done already in lessons, but it doesn't hurt to go over it again. Language and dialogue, and finally the Gothic genre. I think if you can think about this book as part of a sort of a developing popular genre of Gothic literature, that will help you to be able to establish some of these things as being linked to other books that were being published at the time. Okay, so at the end of each of these lessons, I'd like you to tell me what you've learnt and ask me a question if you have got one. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is themes. This will be a long video compared with the others, so let's get started. So science firstly then. Jekyll and Lanyon are the doctors in this novella. Jekyll and Lanyon have different approaches to science and religion. Perhaps that could be your subheading. Firstly then, Dr. Lanyon, he deals with science of the material world. So here, if you can think back to earlier on in the novella, Jekyll is giving a tea party, and Utterson sort of asks a question and says, well, why aren't you good friends anymore? And he says, look, Henry Jekyll became too fanciful for me. He's only interested in dealing with fact and science of the material world, sort of natural sciences perhaps, and biology we could think as well. He doesn't love Jekyll's use of science to experiment with spiritual matters. Jekyll, on the other hand, says about himself that he's leaning wholly towards the mystic and the transcendental. This idea that he kind of finds that he's got a problem, he's got some kind of issue, he's got to deal with this in a scientific way, but rather than sort of deal with it in a logical way like Lanyon would. He tries to sort of deal with it in a mystical way. He tries to get underneath the skin of humanity, as it were, and he tends to use his science to deal with, as it says in the second quotation here, that hard law of life, the root of religion. Nice quotation to learn. The root of religion, the hard law, the kind of rock that Jekyll has come up against, is the fact that humans are sinners. They can't do anything right even if they try, basically. And Jekyll's found this all his life. He's tried to do things well, but he can't. And so instead of kind of being a good person or trying a bit harder, he just decides that science is going to help him to solve this issue by becoming another person, by having this dual personality. Now, Jekyll doesn't hate religion. Nowhere in the novella does it say Jekyll was an atheist. It doesn't say that he's a god hater. He actually is fond of religious texts, and I get the impression that he likes the idea of becoming a religious person without actually having to be good, to do the good that goes along with it. We're just going to have a quick look at this quotation here on the board. A copy of a pious work. This is the moment where Utterson and Poole break down the door in chapter 8. They find some scattered papers, they find Jekyll's diary, they find an envelope with lots and lots of enclosures in, and then they look down and they see a copy of a pious work for which Jekyll had several times expressed a great esteem, annotated in his own hand with startling blasphemies. There's a lot in this quotation, so let's unpack this together now. A pious work, firstly. This is probably most likely the Bible or a commentary written by a preacher or a theologian living in Victorian times. And this is what he has in his study. Strange. In a scientific room, he's got a copy of a pious work. He also holds it in a great esteem. He likes the thought of leading a religious life. He likes the idea of having the head knowledge, shall we say, to go along with this, but he doesn't really take it and apply it to his actions very effectively. He tries, but he fails, and that's why he creates Hyde. There's the idea here, this motif coming back in of handwriting. Remember Guest, Utterson's clerk, he proves that Jekyll has got an involvement with Hyde by looking at the handwriting. It slopes one way, it slopes the other way. This is Jekyll sort of like contriving to make it look like it's somebody else, and we thought about how symbolic that was of the man himself. And when he slopes one way towards good, he's Jekyll. When he slopes the other way towards the left, I can't remember, he's Hyde. He's the evil side of him. And blasphemy is just meaning words of hatred towards God. So this idea that there's conflict inside the man Jekyll is a really interesting point of focus when we're looking at the conflict between science and religion. So if you've got time, pause the video and just note down these annotations on this important quotation. So let's look a little bit more at Jekyll's views on religion in general. He sees religion as an antidote to the sin of Hyde. Remember when Hyde's sin, Hyde's misdoing, Hyde's evilness got even too much for Jekyll. Now that the evil influence Hyde has been withdrawn, a new life began for Dr. Jekyll. He decides almost to turn over a new leaf. He decides that he's going to stop being so hideously evil as Hyde, and this comes off the back of his involvement in the Danvers Carew murder. Well, he murders him. He decides to sort of turn over a new leaf. I'm not going to have anything more to do with Hyde anymore, and he begs Utterson to believe him. So he sees religion as an antidote to the sin of Hyde. And he turns to religious and charitable works in order to somehow heal his conscience, maybe, as he's sort of starting to feel bad about the things that he's done. He doesn't really want to make himself right with God. He just decides to make a show of doing these religious works. And this is a good quotation to note down here. He had always been known for charities. He was now no less distinguished for religion. And it's almost like it's not really sunk down into his heart. It hasn't changed him at all. It's just that he is known for charities, and now he's just distinguished for religion. This is going to link into our next theme about reputation as well. He's trying to kind of put on a brave face. He's trying to show the world his religious side now, because he thinks that it's going to be able to impact him positively. It's going to be able to wash his conscience clean about the sin that he's committed when murdering the MP. He also uses religion to establish and sustain his reputation, and a little bit more explicitly, this quotation helps us to see this. His face seemed to open and brighten as if with an inward conscience of service, and the doctor was at peace. So it's almost like he's showing the world exactly how good he is, and it's making him, he's at least having initially a good impact on him inwardly as well. So he uses religion to establish and sustain his reputation. But is it genuine? Is it actually 100% Jekyll's real person, that he is a religious, charitable man? Now, just to give a little bit of context to this, 19th century Britain was a time where the tension between science and religion was a source of conflict in Victorian society. There's no great new information to you. I'm sure you remember the work that we did on context. At the start of the 19th century, most people believed the explanation from the Bible, that God created the earth. Okay, so here's a little graphic just to show you that most people at the start of the 19th century believed that God created the earth, and this was a really strongly held position, really thought badly of if you started to question these established beliefs. However, throughout the 19th century, scientists had a different explanation. They had a theory. They believed in a process called evolution. They started to re-explain the Bible. They started to say, no, we've got more evidence now. We think that it's basically down to a process of evolution over millions of years. And at first, many Victorians thought this view was very dangerous because it suggested that science had the power to create life. And although this isn't really what the theory purports, it's like this idea that science is now proving to be the dominant source of public engagement rather than religion. And this went, completely against what the religious people would have been talking about at the time. But it's a classic Gothic preoccupation. So when we think a little bit later about the Gothic genre that Stevenson was adding to at this time, what really sparks my interest is this idea of the creating of life being science's remit rather than religion. And this is something that Gothic writers were extremely interested in. I think they kind of knew that they would get people's attention if they had this in their if they had this idea in their novel. They're really getting their Victorian audience's attention, and lots of people did well. They mentioned that in their essay, in their essay that they did on the extract in chapter 7, the incident at the window. We're sort of thinking a little bit here about, okay, how is Stevenson tapping into these weaknesses, these vulnerabilities in his Victorian audience? And this is one of the classic ways that people do this. They shake the foundations of the religion, of the commonly held beliefs of religious teachings, and they start saying, no, this is something to do with science rather than religion. So religion for the Victorians was not only social, but it was personal. And I think it's the same for us today. Whatever our cultural background, whatever the influences on us, if we have a religious experience, if we claim to be part of a religious group, I suppose it's social. We follow what our parents do to some extent, until we can make a personal decision about whether this is right for us as individuals. And I think that it's the same for Victorians as well. You see, Christianity teaches that everyone is born sinful. There's nothing good about humanity. Humanity in its core is flawed. it's evil. And Jekyll feels this very keenly. He's not questioning this at all. He knows that this is true. This is what he believes. And Jekyll's sin makes him state at the start of chapter 10, "Thus it came about that I concealed my passions." I think one of you said that that is basically the whole novel in one quotation. Thus it came about that I concealed my passions. This idea of concealment, hiding something. He has to keep his reputation intact. That's why he conceals his passions. And he has to do it. There's no option for him. He can't just turn good. He has to hide his bad side. So Jekyll creates Hyde as a way to fix his shame. We thought about that idea of shame, that word mortify coming in here, that means both to die and to be shameful. It's his way of dealing with his sin. He doesn't put it to death, he just creates an outlet for it. When thinking about Stevenson's message here, we could be looking at him both criticising the Victorian audiences for placing such a strong emphasis on outward morality, because it actually has the opposite effect on Jekyll. And it's not from lack of trying. He genuinely does try to turn over a new leaf, to live a good life. But the oppression on him, for whatever reason, whatever he wants to do that he can't do, and we're never really told apart from the murder, it actually has the opposite effect. Stevenson is also criticising Jekyll's obsession with reputation and being outwardly religious but inwardly sinful. He's just portrayed as a hypocrite, which is not a good thing to be. I think in the final chapter, chapter 10, the only feeling that I have towards Jekyll is just that he's throwing one big pity party. Like, it's not my fault. Don't you feel sorry for me? And actually I don't. I think he's a bit of a hypocrite by the end, as portrayed by this next point here, because when he invents Hyde, when he concocts that special potion, it changes colour twice, and now it's the perfect potion to drink and to change personality. Jekyll, after that point, doesn't really recognise his own evilness. He doesn't recognise that he's got any flaws. And he says this quotation here. He says, "Hyde alone that was guilty." He doesn't see that Jekyll is in control of anything that Hyde is doing. And I think this resignation of his own authority is the one that destroys him in the end. He resigns himself to Hyde's clutches, as it were. There is this semantic field of religion throughout the book as well, which is good to keep a note of. The secret sinner, the spirit of hell, Satan's signature. And again, that's a language point that many of you mentioned in your essays, that we've got this sibilance helping us to hear the satanic influences coming through Jekyll's experiences. But science is shown to be very powerful. Although it seems to be an antidote to Jekyll's sin, it's also dangerous and destructive. It's powerful enough to cause death and upset the conventional order of Victorian life. There's another quotation that we're going to have a quick look at now. Jekyll's drugs shook the prison house of his disposition. So if you wanted to take a note of this quotation, you could pause the video. I'm just going to go through the annotations very quickly, because it's a very good one in thinking about this idea of concealment, this idea of science, and the power of science. The verb shook, this violent verb conveying the power of the drugs. The metaphor, the confinement that Jekyll feels, he is a slave to sin, that idea, I think that's a quotation from the Bible there, that this is how Jekyll feels. And this isn't the only mention of him being a prisoner. We thought in your essay in chapter 7 about how he's in this confinement like some desolate prisoner. This is used repeatedly throughout, this metaphor of confinement, that he is actually, although he is voluntarily locking himself away, it kind of reflects the metaphorical enslavement that he feels to sin, that he can't escape it, he's just going to have to go with it. And the noun disposition, just relating to the sinful side that has been trapped by his more respectable exterior. Jekyll's science is dangerous. It's powerful enough to cause death and upset the conventional order of Victorian life. Jekyll says that the details of his experiment must not be revealed. How convenient. This ties in with Frankenstein too. Victor Frankenstein, the scientist, refuses to reveal how he brought the monster to life. The mysterious secrecy works quite well for writers because, okay, they weren't scientists. They couldn't go through the details of complex chemical processes. And it would be very tricky to write down these details and to convince a whole audience about it if you had no experience in science. But it also allows them to maintain this mysterious what-if concept, and this is central to Gothic novels. It emphasises the fact that powerful science is something to be feared. If you've got an audience who is who is fearful, they're more likely to take on a moral message from your story. And I think that's the main point there that a lot of you are missing in your essays, the idea that horror is created in order to almost create a vulnerability in the audience, in the readership. That vulnerability allows Stevenson to insert his message. And we're going to have a little think about what that message could be, as it's a tricky one in this novel. So Jekyll's science goes against religious beliefs. Just to tie these two ideas together then finally as we come to the end of this. It's something that we've established already, the idea that Christians would see creating this life as God's remit, nothing to be messed about by humans, by humanity. And Jekyll has a selfishness and a pride, the way he approaches his experiment when he says a discovery so singular and profound, that idea, that superlative so singular and profound, that he's the only person that's done this. He almost sounds conceited, and if you're not convinced that his pride is sort of driving him to conceit, the second bullet point there, the constellations, as he darts from the cabinet to his house the first time that he turns into Hyde, this is what he says. He thinks that the constellations look down upon me, I could have thought with wonder. He thinks the stars, the heavens are looking down on him and are beholding the wonder that he has just created this amazing science experiment that works. And that's a sort of like really pride driven opinion of himself. But above all that, he thinks that he's so impressed with himself, he's so amazed by his own scientific prowess that he thinks, right, okay, I've done something so amazing here, now I am beyond the reach of fate. So not only does it go against religious beliefs in terms of creation, it's also, you could argue, making him more sinful. The idea that he's taking on this proud opinion of himself. We thought about when we did an Inspector Calls, the idea of pride being to think of yourself more highly than you should. There's nothing wrong with being proud of yourself for doing a good piece of work, for getting a good grade on an essay. But if you walk around the world with this idea that, you know, the world owes you something, this idea that you're better than everyone else, we all know people like that, and they're not very nice people to get to know. It's quite an off-putting characteristic, and that's exactly what Jekyll's demonstrating here. So quite an amazing turn of events. He thinks his science is going to treat his sin, and actually it just makes him more sinful. Above all, he does it to protect his respectable facade from the tarnishing of sin. He can just transform back to Jekyll when he likes. And again, thinking about that idea of concealing his passions. So is he going to be able to fix religion? Is he going to be able to fix the problem that he's seen, that he's a sinner, he can't deal with his sin, and therefore does science fix religion? Well, as we've seen through the book, he kind of thinks of himself as being ultimately quite good, but having an evil side. And I think if you're studying this novel and you think that that's as simple as it is. Oh, here's a man, he's good when he's Jekyll and he's bad when he's Hyde. That is an overly simplistic way to view this novel. Because actually we need to look at Jekyll as not being good. We need to look at him as being a mixture of good and evil, like everybody. He is not good, he's a mixture of good and evil. He creates Hyde to try and separate his good and evil side. He thinks that he can just categorise all the bad things he wants to do in one, and therefore he thinks, all right, fine, I've put all the bad stuff on one side. That means that all the good stuff is going to fall on the other side. But as we've just thought about, that doesn't happen. He ends up being mixed when he's Jekyll, good and bad, and pure evil when he's Hyde. We thought about this quotation a lot before in our books, and if you wanted to write it out again, we could have a little look at it just in the context of science and religion. If I am the chief of sinners, I'm the chief of sufferers also. Beautiful antithetical parallelism there, a parallelism as we thought about before, showing that he knows what his reaction should be. He should turn to God maybe for forgiveness, follow the Bible, make a change, live a good life, but he's left feeling this self-pitying experience all the time. And Hyde grows in strength when he does that. Hyde is growing in strength as he's feeding him with these evil impulses. So instead of one good side and one evil side, Jekyll can only create the evil side, Hyde. The other side, Jekyll, remains a mixture of both. As we thought about, science can't fix all the issues of conscience, as Jekyll first thought it would. So what would Stephen's message be about science and religion? And for this we have to we have to guess a little bit. I think in your essays it's important to use those words like perhaps, maybe, Stevenson's message could be, because we don't know for a fact, and I think it's a little bit presumptuous to read into this. But it's definitely okay to suggest a possible reason based on some of the evidence that we've been through. We know that he had a background in both religion and science, so we should be considering this really carefully. You may have different ideas, but looking back through the novella, my ideas are as follows. Religion suppresses people's desires. This is the main thing that Stevenson seems to be criticising in this novel. This is dangerous. This is what Stevenson seems to be saying. This is a dangerous sort of thing. This is a dangerous reach that religion has, to reach into your life and to suppress, to stop you from doing the things that you want to do, because it creates people who are essentially slaves. That motif again of prisons, incarceration, confinement, it's enslaving people. Though it's interesting that it's not as dangerous as Jekyll's experiment. So that's a sort of, if you had to make a dual comment here, on one hand this, on the other hand something else, which I'm always driving you to try and make, it shows that you've got some kind of clever appreciation of these ideas. It's not as dangerous as Jekyll's experiment, because if he was a slave before to reputation, he is an even worse condition when he is enslaved to his drug addiction, and that's something that needs to be picked up on there. We are allowed to be critical of the writer, that's fine. So Jekyll's experiment didn't work, and that's obviously portrayed in the novel. It's he's not writing this novel to get you to try and invent some kind of potion that splits your good and evil side. And so if his experiment didn't work, perhaps you can't separate your good and evil side. That seems to be Stevenson's main message here, that the good and evil side of you can't be separated, because maybe there's no fix for conflict between good and evil, because maybe this is just human nature. It's just the way we are. We're not perfect and we're not completely evil. This is just the way we are, and it can't be fixed. So this is my idea about perhaps what Stevenson's message is in terms of science and religion. Well, thank you for listening to that video. It's taken about half an hour to record, but as you can see there, we've done the first of a little mini series that we're going to be doing together, and which has been science and religion. If you've got any comments or questions, please can you drop me an email and let me know what you liked. Let me know if you've got a question about anything I've said, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.